sharing her experiences, and I could do that, but this is structured and I want to sort of keep orientated, so I might just, is that alright if I just read and then go through PowerPoints, and this is little bite-sized bits that I think will be digestible. I have a tendency when I write to be plunging deep, and it can be convoluted and go all over the place, and I'm just wanting to simplify the more I write and put concepts together and do Bible study. I think, well, I want it to be simple like Jesus taught in way of parables and so forth, because those that are scholarly, you can get sort of immersed and lost in all sorts of stuff, can't you? 1888, covenants and nature of Christ and all that, you know what I'm talking about. So, oops. Okay. God is blameless when he's called into question by the universe. There's a verse in Romans 3:4, it says, "Let God be true and every man a liar, that thou mightst be justified in your words and prevail when you, Elohim, are judged," called into question. So, in this presentation, I'm going to explore the difference between legal law, that some refer to as imposed law or enforced law, and God's design law, and why knowing the difference is vitally important. And why would that be, knowing the difference between a legal law and a design law? As the world gets worse, people are beginning to blame God and question his apparent apathy to widespread human injustice and suffering. And God invites us to question him. He did in Isaiah. In Israel's day, God said to Israel, judge ye between me and my vineyard. What more could have I done for my vineyard? And so we read in Revelation 14, we read, "Fear God and give glory to him, worship the Creator, for the hour of his" what? "Judgment is come." Now, when I first became an Adventist, I used to think, oh, that's our judgment. And you read Facing Life's Record and all that. And the judgment of humankind is a part of plan of salvation. But I'm beginning to see now that it's primarily the judgment of God. God wants us to ask questions. He puts himself on trial and he's inviting questions. And the world is asking questions about God and his methods and principles. And so in Revelation 11 verse 1 it says, John was given a reed like on a rod and instructed by the angel to rise, measure the temple, measure the altar and the worshippers therein, which is interesting because I think it's Haskell in his book in Seer of Patmos, he comments on that and he says that it better put this thing in my pocket. He refers it to the measuring the temple as measuring God, his character, a re-investigation, a review of what he's like, Yahweh. And so today we're going to re-examine Father's character, methods and principles and his laws of life that are grossly misrepresented by mainstream Christianity. Other misunderstood attributes that need radical redefining and which we will explore are his fire, wrath, justice and the law that I talked about, retributive judgment and punishment, or retributive punishment. Many Christians believe that God's relational law, the Ten Commandments, are an imposed or enforced set of rules. A legal law that God inflicts punishment on deviators for breaking those rules. And this corrupt idea actually originated with Satan, who claims to officiate as the voice and the power of God. That's in a Spirit of Prophecy quote. Ellen White wrote that. And I'll read the full quote later. And it says, And so the psalmist referred to Satan's kingdom. This is an interesting verse in Psalm 90, verse 20. You don't need to turn there now, but it says, some of you will be familiar, it says, shall the throne of iniquity have fellowship with thee? Fellowship with who? With Father, that frames mischief by law. It's an interesting text, isn't it?
It is.
The throne of iniquity. That's not the throne of Yahweh, which is the throne of righteousness. His throne shall be established in righteousness. The throne of mercy, mercy and truth together with justice in that throne. And so I want to read now Desire of Ages 762. In the opening of the Great Controversy, Satan had declared that the law of God could not be obeyed, that justice, listen, justice was inconsistent with mercy. And you know, in the Protestant world, they've got mercy here and justice here. And there's an opposition, isn't there, between the two? Oh, God's merciful, but he's also just, which means he must punish, he must have penalties. And this is what I used to think. It's all through literature that you read, terminology. And I'll document some of this stuff in another presentation to show that this is reality. People misunderstand. I'll show you on the slide later that justice, fire, wrath, all these things, punishment, they're all distorted. And so this is what Satan claims. He says that, and that should the law be broken, it would be impossible for the sinner to be pardoned. Every sin must meet its punishment, urged Satan. And if God should remit the punishment of sin, he would not be a God of truth and justice. So Satan didn't just want to dismiss, relinquish God's law, Jehovah's law. He wanted to attach penalties and punishments to it. Can you see that? And so the condemning power of Satan would lead him to institute a theory of justice inconsistent with mercy. He claims to be the officiating as the voice and power of God, claims that his decisions are justice, are pure and without fault. Thus he takes his position on the judgment seat and declares that his counsels are infallible. Now listen, here his merciless justice comes in, a counterfeit of justice abhorrent to God. So Christians either view the world, people and God through a legal lens or design law lens. God did not create and govern a legal universe with arbitrary enforced rules. God created and governs a natural universe with innate laws built in nature, built in human nature, in our nature. I want to bring this out a little bit. Today we will show how God's relational law, or tonight, is a law of life summarising how God's universe is designed to function like the laws of health. There are blessings for living in harmony with God's relational law, as there's blessings in living in harmony with God's health principles. So, and so laws are a reflection of lawmakers, and the relational law is a reflection of Yahweh Elohim's character. So, if people have a wrong perception of God's law, they see it as enforced, imposed rules, and what are they going to think about God? Yahweh, Elohim, Yeshua. They're going to think he's just a cosmic dictator. And it's going to create fear, and that's why I believe is one of the reasons people are going outside of, departing from traditional forms of Christianity to embrace New Age movement, Eastern mysticism, Buddhism and things like that, you know, where there's no war and there's no violence and there's no imposed penalties and punishments. However, those religions, those worldviews, they have their problem, which is the underlying problem of 85-90% of worldviews or religious philosophies contain something called dualism. It's a problem. And dualism is the belief that good and evil must coexist for eternity, like yin and yang, you know. Oh yeah, there's fire and there's water, there's love and hate, and there's contrast, male and female. I'm not talking about that. The problem is when the dualistic idea goes into the realm of the creator or the character of the ruling authority, or as a part of this universe that is normal and natural when it's not. When evil is an infection in this universe that Jesus came to destroy that infection with his remedy of love and truth, to clear away the problem of sin from the universe. So, how does Father deal with sin? That's important, his methods and principles. So everybody has a worldview, you know that? And some people might not know what their worldview is. And if you ask them to share their worldview, many don't really know how to define their worldview. Oh, I just believe such and such because my dad did, or my uncle, or my grandfather, or whatever. Or, oh yeah, I just go along to this or that. But everybody does have a worldview, and our worldview will either be true and healthy, like God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. A worldview is based on the beneficent character of our Father, that he sends the sunshine on the rain on the just and on the unjust and so forth, that he loves all people, and he has unconditional love, and that he operates in that framework of love, truth and freedom. Otherwise, it will be a false or unhealthy worldview. And this is where the subtle inroads come into Protestantism and Catholicism with something called penal substitution or appeasement theology that I'm going to talk about tomorrow, and sort of spell it out more clearly what these deceptions of Satan are for the Christian church. So there's a connection between the natural health laws and God's relational laws, or the Ten Commandments. The associated outcomes for being in harmony or out of harmony with these laws, there are. The big question is, in Deuteronomy 28 you have blessings and curses, the covenant curses, and it's a little bit, you get a bit uncomfortable sometimes when you read that in the past, maybe not so much now, so we're entering the character Father, but in the past I thought, that's pretty kind of harsh, isn't it? Like curses. What does that mean? Are these curses arbitrary punishments inflicted by Father, Yahweh Elohim, or could a misuse of our God-given freedom result in natural consequences?
Yes.
That's my question. So, a natural universe with freedom for all. Love cannot exist without freedom. God grants us freedom and leaves us free to make choices. Life is full of choices, and the accumulated choices we make largely determine the quality of life. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So, good, I can skip some notes because I left my notes, didn't I? So I just skipped through a bit faster. So people think that the ruling authority directly punishes the bad people or those outside a particular stereotype group. Even many SDAs in varying degrees is infected by dualism and appeasement theology, evident by the belief in penal substitution, which there's elements of that which I document. It's in Ministry magazine, it's in the 27 Fundamentals, it's in by people like George Knight. And I don't say this in a demeaning way or to criticise these people or anything like that, or authors. I say that there's a problem in infection in just about every Christian Protestant church, and Adventism is not immune from this. And I'm going to spell it out more clearly tomorrow. I'm just going to do an outline now. But I will say this, in short, appeasement theology, satisfaction doctrine or penal substitution, it comes from, some believe it comes from Anselm and Augustine and all so forth, the 11th century or the 4th century, where there was a false understanding of the atonement. I believe that's part of it, but I actually think it goes right back to Genesis chapter 2, where God's warning of suicide to Adam and Eve, when he said, the day you eat, you shall surely, what? Die. Instead of the Christian world landscape seeing that as a statement of fact, they see it as a threatening statement from Yahweh, Elohim. Don't eat. I've made rules. You break my rules, and there's going to be consequences from me. Okay, here's a lamb. Sacrifice that. That will remit your guilt for now, and that'll point to the Messiah in the future, and he's going to cop the wrath of the Father. So he became a substitute for the Father's wrath and anger instead of us. This is what Protestant believes. And it's either, if you're Catholic, God's honour has been offended and needs to be appeased, and if you're Protestant, it's like the law or justice was offended, and that needs to be appeased, and someone's got to die, someone's got to pay the price, and so, Jesus did it and not me, and so God was angry with the Father. But I'm going to show in a talk tomorrow, the question is, who killed God's Son? Who was angry with Jesus? Because this is one of the deceptions in the last day, not understanding who it actually was that killed Jesus. Yeshua. So we've talked about natural consequences that come from the misuse of our God-given freedom. And so these curses, are they supernatural scourges from God inflicts on transgressors? If they are, that would make God like a good cop, bad cop, wouldn't it? Or like a mafia boss, rewarding those who do what he says and punishing those that don't. Whereas Yahweh, his love is unconditional, and he loves all, and he allows us free to make choices. So a natural universe with freedom to all, and I'm going to move on now and talk about New Start, for example, and illustrate it this way. Are you familiar with New Start? It's an acronym. N for nutrition, E for exercise, W for water, S for sunlight, temperance, air, rest. Are these design laws or imposed laws? It's an easy one. Part of the way God designed, and to illustrate. So everybody knows living, unless you've got super good genetics, you can get away with this stuff. But generally, good health is based on immutable laws: hydration, pure water, good nutrition, temperance, air, rest. And the last one, which kind of links to the relational law, the moral law, is trust in divine power or trusted relationships. Is that important? Our emotional health, our psychological health, a sense of love and belonging. And Dean Ornish, the famous Dr. Dean Ornish, who did a lot of research and got a lot of accolades for his work and research. He's a medical doctor. He did, he showed smoking was harmful and all these things, and he was researching that. Then he wrote a book called, does anyone know what it was? Love and Survival. Love and Survival. I borrowed that book once from the library and I read it, and it's interesting. And he shows in there that longevity and health and wellness is not just depending on eating right raw food and exercising and drinking your water. and all that, and staying away from junk food, he was saying it's really contingent on having a sense of love and belonging. And in that book, there's a terrible story that illustrates the power of love and human need for love, where in Germany there was King Frederick, I think it was in the 16th century, he did an experiment where the newborn babes, he had a bias, the German language, and thought that little babies are going to learn to speak fluent German in time if they're not, even if they're not touched or petted or nurtured by their mothers, these newborn babies. And you know what? That experiment didn't last very long at all. You know why? Every single one of those babies died because they didn't have touch, did they? They didn't have that. Mother, father, parent is a symbol. It's to represent what father is to us. So Christian community, as Seventh-day Adventists or Christians here, whatever, if you're a believer in Father and Son, in a God, in a Creator God, we have that privilege of community, don't we? Connection with the spiritual and with each other, all brothers and sisters, and so that's good for the health as well. And so examples of consequences, say Christian or non-Christian, don't breathe for a couple of minutes. Now, I'm not encouraging you to do this, I'm just illustrating a point. Don't, unless you're Iceman, don't breathe for a couple of minutes. You heard of the crazy Dutchman? Yeah. You can go under ice water for like minutes. I don't know how he does it. Don't drink water for 3 or 4 days. Don't eat for 50 days. Or live on nothing but McDonald's or say Donut King for 50 days. And see how you feel. You know, not very good, is it? The other thing would be to deprive yourself of restorative sleep for 4 or 5 days. Don't exercise, shut yourself away from sunlight, don't socially interact, don't express compassion, gratitude, kindness, or receive from anything, people or God. Don't give or express, or say watch TV programs filled with crime, violence, blame casting, scapegoating, godless behaviour, lie, cheat, steal. Question how you're going to feel with these violations of design laws, of natural laws. You'd be slowly killing yourself, wouldn't you? Because sin pays its own wages. And it's the same with relational law, the moral law. It's not an imposed punishment. God knows that when we're living in deviation of moral law, relational law, there's consequences, outcomes. So, what are the outcomes? Nutritional deficiency, decreased liveliness, dehydration, oxygen deprivation, sleep deprivation, weakness and physical inactivity, sunlight deprivation, a lack of love and belonging. I like how that kind of links to the relational law. These outcomes will sooner or later result in disease and death. I was talking to somebody earlier about Dr. Horst Mueller, is a Seventh-day Adventist ENT, ear, nose, throat specialist. And he keys in on this one with his patients, seeing thousands of them over the years. And he's found that disease is largely because of a result of personal loss and dysfunction in the sense of giving to receive rather than receiving to give. And he says there's a huge difference. Receiving to give, trust in divine power. Receiving to give in the flow of life, or the law of life, which Desire of Ages 2, page 2, it says all things Jesus took, but he received, he took to give, and that's beautiful. And plants and animals and healthy systems function that way in this cycle of life. But with the evil eye, Dr. Horst Mueller explains, is is an eye that gives to receive. It's performance-based, and this is Satan's kingdom. So, he says that whether you're an atheist or a Christian, when you step out of the law of life, that creates disharmony or bad music in the body, bad frequency, bad energy, or bad electricity. And so this is all the building blocks, the food we eat and things like that. It produces building blocks to nutrients to build brain, bone, muscle and blood and so forth. But what we think, it creates frequency in the body, and so it's important that our thoughts are in harmony with the law of life and with the principles of love. So you can see disease and illness and things like that when people get sick. It's not always because of nutritional deficiencies or toxicity and things like that. It's because of being out of harmony with these things. Now, on the other hand, on the upside, a wise and proper application of the following of New Start principles promote health, happiness, improve quality of life. So, the true remedies: receive adequate nutrition with a wide variety of fresh natural foods suited to your body type. Engage in enjoyable exercise, preferably out in the sunlight, the fresh air. Well hydrated, get rest, cultivate self-control, abstaining from things that are toxic and harmful. Having an attitude of gratitude, a healthy view of God, where you are attracted to Him and trust Him, good social interaction, sense of genuine love and belonging. So I want to underscore that healthy view of Father. Because that's where the worldviews come in, and why there's many destructive worldviews. There's a nice promise: behold, I love thee with an everlasting love. I think it's in Jeremiah. And loving kindness have I drawn thee. Behold what manner of love the Father has given unto us. And so I already talked about that, and I want to illustrate. We talked about violations or deviations from natural laws. Like, obvious one, if you're smoking, you get lung cancer and all that. We sort of know about that. But what about here's an extreme example. Imagine a young man, let's say his name is Jared, and he believed in natural immortality, you have life in yourself, and was about to jump off a 10-story building. And one of his mates says, Jared, don't do it. The day you eat, you shall, surely die. Is that to be taken as a death threat from his friend or statement of fact? That's why going back to Genesis is important to get the foundations right and realise that God was stating a fact of suicide. If they go that way, it was not a death threat. And that's important. So when Yahweh Elohim said to Adam and Eve, the day you eat, you shall surely die, it was not a threat of divine execution, but simply a statement of fact. And misunderstanding this leads to false ideas of the atonement. So we need to rethink. The other things are, I believe, fire, wrath, justice, judgment, and punishment. And what I'm sharing to you this evening is things in my earlier Christian experience that I was mixed up on all these things. Let the Bible dictionary define its own terminology. Isn't that cool? Mm. Yeah? The Bible is its own dictionary, isn't it? Yes. If you go to a human dictionary, and they're great, I'm not knocking dictionaries, but say look at justice, you're going to get a different interpretation or understanding of justice than what the Bible will tell you. So I've done a few here to illustrate the point, Yahweh's intense compassion and convicting, purifying love and truth. Number one, that is the primary dynamic or the way our Father's fire works. It's a revelation of love and truth. And I'm not going to turn to all these verses, but I'm just putting the evidence down on the bottom. Secondly, it's combustible fire, such as that which will cleanse the earth before it is renewed. And I'll give you an example. Isaiah 33, it says, "Who shall dwell with everlasting burnings? Who shall stand with devouring fire?" And actually the answer to Isaiah's question, it's actually the righteous for eternity. They're going to dwell with the everlasting burnings. In Solomon, you know, the book of Solomon talks about Yahweh as a most vehement flame. Isn't that beautiful? Love is stronger than death. Jealousy is cruel as a grave. Many waters cannot drown love, and so forth. You know, the jealousy, the passion of Yahweh, it's like a vehement flame. Our God, our Father, is a consuming fire. He doesn't just light fires to destroy people. It's going to be the revelation of his character after the 1,000 years that is going to destroy, consume sin. So people will welcome the flames, or they'll be, Father's love will be destructive. Wrath, Yahweh giving up his, or handing over the spiritually immature, the children, the rebellious, to experience consequences of their misuse of freedom in cultivating bad stuff. And you read that in Romans chapter 1, verse 24, 26, 28. Have a look at it. For this cause he gave them over. Now it's talking about humanity, the sin problem, and it says, you know, it's all this perversion going on and turning the truth of God into a lie and worshipping the creature more than the creator and all kinds of perversion, sexual perversion and stuff. And it says, God just handed them over. God allows freedom, but there's consequences. Isn't that a different picture to punishments, imposed punishments and wrath and anger and all this stuff, you know, that is being taught in evangelical Christianity? So, you know, there's all the verses there. If anybody wants a copy of these notes and stuff, I can do that. That's no problem. If you want to have a look at these verses another time. So the eventual removal of angelic protection. And there's a lot more I can say about that. This is just a big picture outline today. Justice, righteous actions, defending the small and the victimised of society and delivering the oppressed. It's not get even, you know, like political justice, is it? Or retributive justice. Now, by the way, even worldlings are recognising that the old forms of justice do not work. Retributive justice does not work. It does not reform people. No. It doesn't fix things.
It doesn't heal the mind.
Doesn't heal the mind. Doesn't change the character. I'm going to be sort of getting a bit more into that tomorrow as well, on the whole character aspect. Because I want to say this is something I've thought about a lot, that in the Christian world, it's, even within Adventism, it's like a legal gospel. Now, I used to think legalism is just, you know, going overboard with reforms and being very law-focused and all that. I'm beginning to see legalism is really a legal aspect of the atonement, the cross, how God deals with things. It's a lot more than that. Sin is seen as a legal matter that needs to be done in a courtroom rather than a condition of the heart. that needs remedying, that needs healing. And if people just have a legal gospel, Jesus, his blood paid the price, he covers you, without any responsibility and character change and conversion and being filled with the Spirit, then it's legal fiction, gospel fiction. Mm. So the diagnosis of our condition that determines whether we have taken the remedy and been transformed and have the character of Christ to cure fear and selfishness. That was our inheritance in Genesis. Fear and distrust of Father. He's out to punish you. God's selfish. You can't trust him. And it causes fear and shame and guilt. Punishment, predictable outcomes. This is similar to Yahweh's wrath. And what about the God of the Old Testament? What about the seemingly questionable divine directives of sacred, justified violence, so-called, throughout the books of Moses involving war and genocides? Question, does our Old Testament narrative perspective contribute to a health-promoting view of Father?
No.
Those stories. It can be. It's a neutral. It's a question that can go both ways. It depends on our perspective, on our narrative perspective. If it's a healthy one, if we understand the methods and principles of Father, of how he deals with sin, then those stories won't bother us because we're going to know who's doing what. So Yahweh, just want to... this is important to recognise Yahweh's adaptive will, which allowed and put up with violence, pillage and war, which happened. There's no denying that. It happened. Israel choosing a king to be like the nations around them. No, it wasn't choosing a king, it was choosing a king with the wrong motive to be like the nations around them. That was the problem. Stuffing their bellies with quail, stoning as capital punishment, etc., etc. It's not the same as his preferred will, in my opinion. That's the conclusion I've come to in Scripture, big picture. So God's adapted will, he adapted to time and culture. He gave freedom for people to do things that were destructive. But if people read those stories, the barbaric stories and the bad stuff, and they say, that's Father's preferred will, what are they going to think about Father? It's going to be a distorted view, a false picture of God. That's not very healthy. So the Old Testament contains multivocal voices, someone has said, Greg Boyd said, that can be reduced to two, the major voice and the minor voice. So I submit the major voice is fallen man's behaviour and a false picture of Yahweh, Elohim, and the minor voice is Yahweh's righteous actions that reflect the true picture of Father as manifest in the life and teaching of Yeshua. It's easy to blur these two voices, not recognise these two opposing voices are like two witnesses in court, and we are to reason and decide which voice reflects the character of Father. That's what works for me, because everything the Father is must match Yeshua, Jesus.
Have an example of that off the top of your head?
Yeah. Okay. The disciples said to Jesus, they said, oh, well, when they went into Samaria to preach, share the gospel, invite people for that, and they rejected it, they said, well, Jesus, will you command fire to come down and destroy them, as in the days of Elijah? And what did Jesus say? What did Yeshua say? You don't know what spirit you are of. The Son of Man has not come to destroy men's life, but to what? To save, to heal, restore. So here you've got violence, sacred violence, and Adrian Ebens has done a whole talk and message on this stuff about the seemingly contradictions, but between New Testament experiences and teachings of Jesus and Old Testament, but the contradictions dissolve. The contradiction is in the human mind. Because we've all sinned and come short of the glory of God, and there's none not righteous, and God's saying, look, you've judged me wrong. And God's inviting us, saying, look, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done to my vineyard? And there's another very, very important principle I want to come to that helps resolve, that is a key. Because we're to gather the evidence, aren't we? Come and reason, isn't that what it says in Isaiah? Come and reason, says the Lord. Don't just things come down from the pulpit and people quoting bits of scripture. We need to gather the evidence, have an intelligent faith and an understanding of Father that is consistent all the way through. Yahweh Elohim is consistent all through, old and new. And here's a big thing that helped me in exploring these things. Yahweh allowed Satan to maintain, and I've got a whole study on this, to maintain a very low profile in the Old Testament. He appears more like, that is Satan, the adversary. The Hebrew word is adversary, something like that. So it's like a servant angel rather than a cosmic rebel. Oftentimes it's not easy to know who's doing what. And to back up what I'm saying here, just read the book of Job, chapter 1 and 2. So, Father gets blamed for the devil's bad stuff, devouring fire, coming down, destruction, as in the case of Job 1 and 2. It actually says he's doing it, but then you read Job chapter 2 and you get more of a picture of really what's going on. And then even there, it's like Satan comes and it's almost like God's entertaining the idea of Satan to go and play around with Job, isn't it? Almost like an accomplice. You go, but you have freedom to go and mess his life up, but it's limited freedom. But it's a lot of freedom that he's granted. And I submit all through the Old Testament, Satan is given an extraordinary amount of freedom, but there's a reason for that. And this is where the cross comes in. The cross simultaneously magnified Yahweh's agape of non-violent enemy love and exposed victimization, exposed blame casting and violence. It crucified all false pictures of a warrior God, of a violent God. Because Father's own Son, rather than save his life, he would give his life and he would not retaliate and respond to violence. And his cross is in sympathy for all martyrs, all people that have wrongly been victimised or scapegoated over the years, including prophets and all sorts of people. But he came back, didn't he, from the dead, and the victim speaks. And this is interesting. I'm deviating off for a little while, but I just want to say this. When the Romans, when the people crucified Yeshua, when he was resurrected again by the Father and he came back to the life, instead of getting vengeance on his enemies, he didn't do that, did he? Like, people, in Revelation it says, the martyrs, it says, they're crying for vengeance, you know. But that's symbolic, because really we're to love our enemies and forgive our enemies. And so martyrs don't cry for vengeance, and Jesus didn't either. He just loved his enemies. And so when he came back to life, instead of, right, I'm going to use my power to get even, get justice with you guys, what did he do? He didn't do that at all. It's awesome. It's amazing, his love. So, Satan's lies, false allegations were exposed. And you read that, I think it's John 12:31, I was reading earlier today, and it says, now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men to me, and it says, the prince of this world is judged. Yeah, now is the judgment. So at the cross, Satan was judged. He's not fully judged, but as a partial judgment and exposure of his wicked schemes. And it's interesting because Old Testament, you have Satan behind a lot of bad stuff, and there's only about 26 references to the adversary in the Old Testament. Come in the New, and there's a lot more. There's more of an exposure. There's the demonic activity, there's encounters, and there's Jesus identifying Satan and so forth, and talking about his wicked works. So I'm just putting this out, just have a look at this, it's interesting. And it all comes back to the rules of engagement and God's reason for freedom. And I believe Satan can't say, oh, well, God, you were just dogging my steps and exposing me and so forth and so forth. God has given an extraordinary amount of liberty and of freedom for all people, hasn't he? But to a point. This is amazing. God is just so incredible. But the way, you know, it says when a strong man is fully armed, he guards his palace. And that's referring to Satan. The strong man guards his palace. He claims ownership of this world. But when a stronger than he comes, which was Yeshua, he shall bind the strong man. He shall first bind the strong man and take away his armour and spoil his goods. In other words, Calvary was a stripping away of the armour of Satan. And he was bound by love. But not by force or destruction, but by exposure. Natural universe free of war. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations shall not lift up sword against a nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. So in the new earth, there's going to be none of this stuff, the violence and the death, and a universe free from that. And something in my notes there, I won't go into it too much, but how am I going for time, by the way? How long have I been going? I don't even know. Is this making sense? Is this...
Yes,
yeah?
yes.
You've been blessed by some of this?
We're definitely blessed.
Some Christians, including Adventists, have written things that implicate God has punished people already. Sodom and Gomorrah, the flood, and so forth. As I was thinking about this and listening to another person talk about this, it occurred to me that, and it's there all along, that we know about it, that no, the flood was not a punishment. Sodom and Gomorrah was not a punishment. All these other things that people think are punishments. Because the punishment of sin, the ultimate punishment of sin, when does it occur, according to the big picture? Because those people are asleep. Those people are asleep. Sodom and Gomorrah, the flood, and so forth. First death is what? Asleep. I've given you a clue.
the second death they're going to die.
Second death after the millennium, the 1,000 years. Now that is super duper cool, because if you read the last chapters in the Great Controversy on all this, and it's interesting, it explains the fire and the wicked after the 1,000 years, you know, gathered together surrounding the city. You read it in Revelation 20 and so forth. And what happens? It's the fire. It's the fire. It's Yahweh. It's actually Yeshua, the Son of God, that he comes down in all his glory and it floods. It goes through the city and out the gates. By the way, the gates of the city are open. God doesn't arbitrarily force anybody out. He says, whosoever will, let him come, drink the water of life freely. And so that's interesting that you see in Revelation about the gates being shut, but they're open. Well, it says, one of the Bible verses in Revelation, you see the gates shall not be shut or something. You can find it. And so anyway, the point is that the punishment, rather than being an imposed thing of condemnation and so forth, it's revelation. Isn't that different? The traditional idea of fire. So again, the fire, as we said before, it's two things. It's Yahweh, it's a vehement flame, it's everlasting burnings, his love and truth, and that he allows people free. And in a secondary sense, it's a combustible thing. So, free from blame, casting, coercion, and, praise Father, free of imposed legal laws. It's going to be a kingdom of natural law, design law. Now I've done a little sort of diagram to, can you read that? That under the legal lens, you've got a unity, co-three eternal persons, with those three beings possessing dual character. Okay, and so you find that in Christianity, the popular idea of Trinity God with how many characters? Split personality, justice, mercy, opposition, good cop, bad cop, mafia boss. Rather than like Yeshua, Jesus, consistent, perfect in character. I am the Lord and I change not. So it says in Deuteronomy, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Now I used to think that in context of identity. Now I'm seeing it and I love this. I'm saying, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one in character. Singular, perfect in character. And by the way, in Luke, gives the definition, it tells you what perfection is. Jesus said, Be ye therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, in Matthew. In Luke, which is the equivalent to Matthew, Yeshua says, Be ye therefore merciful, and get on to this. Read the context, and it's prior to that, the key verse, it's love your enemies, do good to them that use you, pray for them that despitefully persecute you, and all that. Love your enemies. So enemy love, being merciful. That's what perfection of character is, singleness of character and consistency. And I submit that Father and Son are like that. They're single. And so you have these models of God out there, constructs that are humanly devised, that are dualistic, yin and yang, good and bad. And justice, we've already talked about that. Mercy opposed to justice. Direct punishment, wrath inflicted upon the sinner. Under this model, salvation. Sin is a legal problem that requires a legal solution. Jesus paid the price by being punished in our place by Father. When it's really wicked men and powers of darkness. Justice, every sinner must meet its punishment, urged Satan. Here the merciless justice comes in, a counterfeit abhorrent to God. Judgment is seen as a legal finding, determination of arbitrary imposed punishments. Retributive punishment. Now, how much better is this? A natural universe, natural laws, physical, spiritual, health, relational. God, Father and Son, one, perfect, changeless, undivided in character. One, 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 one. That's what Father revealed to me, and I felt blessed when I got that light bulb moment. Ah, yes, one, one, one. Character, undivided. There's no variableness or shadow of turning. What did Yeshua say? You've seen me, you've seen the Father. So, gracious God forgives, heals, restores, transforms, empowers. It's not a legal gospel, it's a healing gospel that we take the remedy, love and truth, and it brings a change in character, heart and mind, not just clearing legal debts in heaven. Abundant in goodness and truth, honours freedom above all. God is love, and love cannot be forced. The exercise of force, we read it in Desire of Ages. We had a little devotional down the creek. It was awesome with Andrew when he was here and a few others, and we're reading that love cannot be commanded. The exercise of force is contrary to the character of God. Righteous and just, restorative. And I put this last slide in this afternoon. Bit of a conclusion. Everyone has a worldview, even if they don't quite know what it is. Yet it is either based on reality and truth, or subtle lies and deceptions, and therefore either psychologically and damaging, emotionally damaging to health, promoting, or psychologically and emotionally damaging. I've made a mistake there. You know what I'm saying, don't you? It's health promoting or health damaging. Yeah, that's fine. 85–90% of worldviews are unhealthy. Not based on reality, but dualism. Lies about the universe and Father, Yahweh and Yeshua. God's laws are natural design laws, not legally imposed. Sin pays its own wages. The final message to lighten the earth will diminish all false allegations against Father's character of love and reveal him as he is, just like Son came to reveal. That's my message this evening.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Let's have a prayer, shall we? Father, you are totally good. You are awesome and beautiful. And I love the prayer of David in Psalm 27 verse 4, where he says, "One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I might dwell in the house of the Lord forever, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire, ask questions, inquire in his temple." So that's the one thing, the one desire. His prayer was not just inheriting mansions, but to inherit the mansions because you are there and perfection of beauty. And as Lamentations says, that Israel was supposed to be, intended to be, reflect the perfection of beautiness, of holiness, which is your singleness of character, your love, your enemy love, your unconditional love. Thank you for your beautiful design, that it just diminishes fear, that we don't have to be fearful of you. Perfect love casts out fear. Where fear is, there's torment. Love is not perfect where there's torment, where there's fear. And I thank you for the perfect representation of you, that we have a living, breathing, walking, talking expression of you, Jehovah, that came to reveal exactly what you like and clear up the misrepresentations, the lies, the distortions about your methods and principles, your kingdom principles and your kingdom of character. It's not a legal universe, it's not a legal law, it's a natural design law, natural design universe, and you're going to restore it. And I thank you for the remedy that you procured with your blood that remits the infection of lies, the cancer within us, and makes us clean before you, that we can have that remedy and of love, truth and freedom, and that the truth burns away the lies within us. And I thank you for that. In Father's name, amen.